On n'est pas des autruches presents the invisible dangers of plastics.
So it's not a waste that kills us. In any case, not immediately.
Hi! What do you think is the biggest problem with plastic waste? Because you see, plastics are everywhere, and you hear a lot about plastic waste. But what do you hear? What do people tell you about this pollution? Do you know the biggest danger? No! We'll look at why this pollution is of such concern. Why this could lead to world population regulation. Like the one already underway in the wild? To begin with, let's hear what researcher Nathalie Gontard has to say. The biggest problem. Hello, Nathalie. When we talk about plastic pollution, we're talking about waste. Is it a waste that has a particularity?
When we talk about plastic pollution, it's often hard to know what we're talking about. What we first think of very often is a macro waste. We mainly think of a macro waste. It's a waste we see. The waste we're throwing away. It's the waste we find in nature. It's the ugly waste. It's the waste that kills animals. Kills. The waste that kills animals. And plastic is not a waste product that kills us, at least not immediately. But that's not where the danger of plastic lies for us and all living organisms on Earth. And often, when we also think about plastic, we think of its carbon footprint. And we think of climate change. And yet, that's not where the danger of plastic lies either. So it's true that often we struggle to understand. What is this pollution? What are we actually talking about when we talk about pollution? Well, when we talk about plastic pollution, we talk about plastic particles. That is to say, precisely, plastic behaves in a very particular way. And this behavior doesn't just start when it becomes waste. It starts from its production. This behavior is a very particular form of aging, which other materials don't display. It's a material that will fragment, but over a very long time. And we could say, finally, there are other materials that persist for a very long time. Papers, cardboards, wood also fragment, but over a much shorter time. Whereas plastics last for centuries and centuries. Wood can take decades to decompose. But we're not going to end up with wood particles that persist for millennia. In fact, it's also this fragmentation. For example, materials based on glass or metal also persist, but they don't fragment. In other words, they solubilize and can re-enter the geochemical cycles.
Biodegradation. To understand these geochemical cycles, let's take the example of the organic matter cycle. It's the cycle of everything you eat and of the plants and animals on Earth. Take the example of the tree leaves falling to the ground in a forest or in your garden. In nature, all living organisms are called organic materials because they contain carbon. Carbon is an essential element for life. For example, plants absorb carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. At their death, the carbon in these plants returns to the natural environment through a series of transformations. It's called biodegradation. Most matter breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, under the influence of physical and biological factors. Once sufficiently degraded, the matter is gradually assimilated by microorganisms such as bacteria. At the final stage of biodegradation, called bioassimilation, all that remains is carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere, water, and carbon-rich organic matter, known as biomass or humus. This new biomass naturally fertilizes the soil and encourages the growth of new plants. Here we touch on a first major problem. Plastic is not biodegradable. This means that plastic can't be broken down by living organisms. No!
Take the tree leaves that fall in your garden. The leaves never pile up in your garden, because our ecosystem has the biological tools to degrade these materials. This allows the tree to recover nutrients and resynthesize the same leaf the following spring, and then again for all the following years, indefinitely. This is the biological carbon cycle. The short organic carbon cycle. So we thought we could do the same with plastic, except that plastic doesn't work that way. Plastic isn't made for that, because it's a material precisely that interacts, degrades, and gets damaged. Then it's a material that can't be recycled. In the end, I would say plastic stands out from all other materials It can't reintegrate into one of the bio-geo-chemical cycles that stabilize our ecosystem. And that's the number one problem. And that's about the plastic footprint. It's not about the carbon footprint. It's about micro and nano waste, not macro waste. So it's not enough just to not throw away our waste to reduce plastic pollution. Plastic is therefore a material with very specific behavior. We don't find this in any other material that humans have used so far. And this fragmentation lasts a very long time and goes very far. Down to microplastics, and down to nanoplastics. The size of plastic particles decreases.
Well there. This brings us to a second major problem. In your house, in your bedroom, in your bin, in your street, or in nature, every piece of plastic ages unlike any other material humans have used so far. Ouch! That's a bit embarrassing. All these plastics break down into billions of tiny particles over hundreds of years. And there are plenty around you already. And nature doesn't have the energy needed to destroy them. No natural geochemical cycle can integrate them. Travel and contaminate.
And this fragmentation lasts a very long time and is very effective. The more we go down in size, the more easily this plastic can travel. By water. By land. By air. As we know, he travels very well now by air.
And yes, this is the third big problem. These tiny plastic fragments are increasingly small. They become invisible to the naked eye. Their lightness allows them to travel thanks to atmospheric circulation currents, and thereby to pollute all places on Earth, going from the deepest oceans to the glaciers of the highest mountains, going through rivers, lakes, soils and cities. Brief, no place on Earth seems to be spared. Gosh! For example, this photo shows a small transparent worm living in the sea. If you look closely, there. The blue thing, this is a piece of synthetic fabric that can come from your jacket, your curtains, your carpet, your sports bag, your underwear. This plastic may have traveled through the air and fallen in the rain. You can even find out how many pieces of plastic fall every day on the plasticforecast.com website. It is like the weather bulletin but for plastics.
The forecasts combine daily measurements of plastic in the atmosphere with rainfall data. Forecasts indicate the amount of plastic that will fall each day. It's a daily reminder that plastic production is pushing our planet to breaking point. Plastic production is threatening our health and that of our children. It's terrible, but there are reasons to hope. Although we can't control the weather forecast, we do have the power to control the weather for plastic.
Once they fall with the rain, these tiny plastics are trapped in the soil that feeds us. And you eat plastic like everyone else. Gosh! What if we told you that every day you swallow plastic, microscopic pieces? According to a WWF study published in 2019, we consume the equivalent of a bank card, up to 5 grams of plastic each week. Indeed, in this study carried out in 2020 in China, the researchers showed that microplastics can penetrate through cracks in the epidermis of wheat and lettuce roots. These plastics then rise with the sap, until the summit, where plastics are found in the edible parts. In other study, photos show of microplastics detected in a carrot and in an apple, purchased on a market in Italy. For the moment, there are only a few microplastics in these fruits and vegetables. But as humanity continues to produce ever more plastic waste, so we continue to pollute the soils more and more. On the United Nations website, you can also read in an article published in October 2022 that these microplastics can change the physical structure of the Earth under our feet and limit its ability to retain water. They can also affect plants by reducing root growth and nutrient absorption. So, in a few years, our ears of wheat, our salads, our apples and our carrots, will they be filled with plastic? What taste will they have? And besides, will they still manage to grow? Mystery! This is a more recent French study from 2022. The data shows more precise values for the number of microplastics found in apples, carrots, and lettuce, but also in pears and broccoli, in animals like shells, shrimp, fish, chicken, and in other food products such as honey and milk, in sugar and salt, and finally in drinks such as tap water and bottled water. Sugary drinks, and beer. Feel free to consult the figures. They are impressive and vary between a few particles and a few 100,000 particles per gram or per litre. So this is the fourth big problem of plastics. As they travel, these particles, invisible to the naked eye and indestructible, contaminate everything. The air you breathe, the water you drink, and the soils and oceans that feed you. They contaminate all wild or domesticated animals. And this contamination will only increase until humanity drastically reduces global plastic production. Obviously, stop this production is a bit complicated. I'm not naive. Some plastics are very useful to us. But now ask yourself whether the benefits of every plastic object you use outweigh the drawbacks of global pollution. Every day, every moment, before you buy or use a plastic object, take a few seconds and ask yourself this question. Do you agree to conscientiously worsen the contamination of all your food and that of all future generations? But let's continue. Translocate.
It also travels inside the organs of living beings as soon as it reaches nanoscopic size, and also at a microscopic size. Plastics are able to translocate. Plastic is able to cross the barrier.
Wait, slower! Natalie talks about natural barriers that protect living organisms. In particular, she talks about the natural barriers that protect organs from physical attack, chemical attack, or biological attack. Viruses, bacteria, fungi. Here is the list of the 6 main barriers you have in your body. To understand how plastics manage to enter your body, we have to understand how these barriers work. Let's look at the functioning of the one that protects your brain.
Most of our organs receive oxygen and nutrients in the same way. The heart pumps oxygenated blood through the arteries into the bloodstream. These arteries then branch out into tinier and tinier blood vessels called capillaries. Capillaries surround the various organs and have very thin walls. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other compounds can diffuse through these walls. They get in or out of the bloodstream. The central nervous system includes the brain and spinal cord. Just like any other organ, it gets oxygen and nutrients from the blood. But its organs are a little more sensitive to changes in their direct environment. So they need a bit more security around their blood supply to keep themselves stable. That's where the blood-brain barrier comes in. The BBB. It is an anatomical separation between the brain's capillaries and the cerebral fluid itself. It is made of a few different structures, including special cells, endothelial cells. This blood-brain barrier is purpose-built to be a selectively permeable barrier. Its walls are considerably thinner than the blood vessels around muscles, but the cells that make up the capillaries are linked by tight junctions that allow virtually nothing to pass through. The capillaries around some other organs actually have tiny pores in them. This is not the case with cerebral capillaries, which are more impenetrable. I spare you from details. So you see, the BBB is not totally impenetrable. It is simply more selective in what it lets through. In order to be more selective, it contains a number of transport proteins. These transporters allow various nutrients to enter and waste to leave. But it is important to note that some elements can pass directly through cells without passing through a transporter, like oxygen and carbon dioxide. But these two molecules dissolve in the lipids that make up the fatty matter of living organisms, and the cell membrane itself is made up of lipids. So, oxygen and carbon dioxide can pass directly through the membrane.
So this is it. Let's go back to the plastic. Why is it able to cross the barrier? What does this have to do with the fact that this protective barrier is made up of lipids?
Why can plastic translocate? It is able to cross the barrier because it is not inert. In other words, it will be able to interact with its environment and absorb the substances it encounters along the way. In other words, when it comes close to the membranes that all living organisms have to protect them, well, as it is interactive, there will be an interaction between the proteins of the organs it approaches and itself. It's as if the plastic has taken on an invisibility cloak. It's not the only particle that does this, but plastic does it very well. This is called a corona, which is a layer that is created around the plastic particle. And your organs are no longer able to recognize plastic as a foreign body, and so that's why plastic can easily pass the barriers.
Let's see this scientific article published in 2023. You can read that the researchers have calculated different processes that take place at the level of the protective barrier of your brain. In particular, they looked at what could happen when a plastic particle gets closer to it. Here's what they found. These black balls represent polystyrene. The grey balls surrounding the plastic represent the lipids we mentioned earlier. The brain is represented, here in orange, and it is surrounded by its protective barrier, the BBB, in green. When camouflaged polystyrene approaches the brain, here's what happens. And there you go. The polystyrene easily went in. And that's unfortunate because this lipid, here in grey, could be the cholesterol that is naturally present in your blood. Ouch, that's annoying. The researchers also carried out an experiment with mice. They prepared polystyrene balls of 3 different sizes. They used 3 colors to make them easier to recognize. They fed 2 mouse groups. A first group with food and plastic balls, and a second group with only food. Then, 2 hours after the meal, they killed mice from each of the 2 groups. Their brains were cut into slices and analyzed under a microscope. This photo shows a brain slice of a mouse that has not eaten plastic. The large green and blue spots you can see here are natural parts of the brain. These spots are not perfectly circular and are larger than the balls. And here is a photo of a brain slice from one mouse from the other group. Well, scientists say that these little green dots here and there are in fact the smallest green polystyrene balls used in the experiment. These balls took less than 2 hours to reach the brain. And you too, like everyone else, you eat plastic. Is the same thing happening in your brain right now? Mystery! So this is the 5th big problem with plastics. Humanity, unconscious, completely loses control of waste, and plastics fragment in tiny pieces capable of reaching the inside of our organs. And worst of all, they even reach the best protected part of your body, your brain, which controls all your central nervous system. Ouch! 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 So what happens now? Apoptosis. You know that the plastic fragments you breathe, drink, or ingest can enter your brain by hiding behind a layer of fat. So now let's see how your brain's defense system reacts to such an intrusion. To understand this, I need to introduce you to microglial cells. They are your brain's guardians, trying to get rid of any fragments of plastic that are too intrusive.
Today, we know that microglia are fundamentally different from other brain cells. They're part of your immune system. One of the most important tasks of microglia is to cleanse the brain of waste products. Microglia look for dead cells and harmful intruders that might cause disease. And while researchers often say that microglia sweep up this waste, what actually happens is much more ingenious. In their normal state, microglia have several arms. These arms grope around looking for dangerous invaders or damaged neurons. When they find a problem, they move toward it. Then they pull in their arms. They turn into a sort of blob. And they eat the problem. Microglia swallow the problem. They then transfer what they have eaten to their lysosomes, tiny internal sacs that act like stomachs. Lysosomes contain digestive enzymes. These enzymes break down larger molecules into smaller ones that feed the microglia. Thanks to this, these cells protect you against dangerous intruders, such as viruses.
But with plastics, that's not going to happen. A Korean research team also made mice ingest fluorescent plastic balls. But this time it lasted for 7 days. And then, when they looked at their organs under a microscope, they found balls in the kidneys. This organ of the urinary system has multiple functions, including eliminating toxins from your blood. On the left, you can see a slice of kidney under the microscope. And on the right-hand side is an image showing the fluorescent balls, here in red. If you compare them with images of kidneys from mice that have not been fed plastic, you can see the differences. And there are the same differences in the intestines or in different parts of the brain. In the cortex, which is the main part of your brain and looks like this. In the hippocampus, which is hidden in the middle and plays a central role in memory and getting around. And in the cerebellum, which is further down at the back and controls your movements. This study therefore confirms that after 7 days, plastic balls were able to enter various organs. In particular, the plastics balls were able to cross the blood-brain barrier and are still there, just about everywhere. But there's more. Using dyes, the researchers were able to detect the presence of microglia in these areas. You can see them here in the 3 parts of the brain, colored blue. These blue areas are only the central parts of the microglial cells. Another method shows the arms of these cells, here in green. And by combining the 2 images, you can perhaps better recognize the waste-eating beast. The plastic balls are located in the same area as the microglia. Since microglia are supposed to defend the brain against intruders, microglia should eat the plastic. Well, the Korean researchers obviously asked themselves the same question. But unfortunately, it's not possible to look at this in a slice of dead mouse brain. However, there is a nicer way of doing this. Use human microglial cells, HMC3, grown in the laboratory. HMC are used to study what might be going on in your brain. During this time, researchers can observe the HMC development under the microscope. In this image, you can recognize their shape, with their elongated arms used to keep an eye on what's going on around them. Under normal living conditions, the number of cells should double after 2 days. Then the number of cells should triple after 3 days. To test the impact of plastics on microglia, the researchers added plastics to the culture. Researchers saw that the number of cells had increased significantly after 24 hours. There were almost twice as many. But then, the number of cells strangely decreased after the 2nd day of culture. There were fewer cells than under normal conditions, and this decline continued until the 3rd day. There were less than half the normal number of cells expected. Strange, isn't it? What's more, you can see that after 24 hours, the balls, here in yellow, are inside the tentacular parts of the microglia, here in green. And yes, the microglia have indeed eaten them. Cool, but what happens next? In the article, the researchers explained that they carried out a battery of biochemical tests. They first measured various markers at the very start of the cell culture, and they measured the same markers again after 24 hours. In these figures, the darker the trace, the more the biochemical marker was present in the microglia culture. The results show, for example, that survivin decreased after 24 hours. This is a molecule that prevents the self-destruction of microglia. Without survivin, the cells will let themselves die by a process called apoptosis. The results also show that many markers increase like these. I'm not going to go into detail, but you should know that these are markers that actually promote apoptosis. This process is one of the possible pathways of cell death. Apoptosis is genetically programmed and necessary for the development and survival of living organisms. But here, this apoptosis is very probably a premature death of cells in response to a signal. And this signal is certainly linked to poisoning by plastics eaten by the microglia. This is the 6th major problem with plastics, which humanity is totally losing control of. They could act as neurotoxic substances, triggering the premature death of microglia. This is a bit annoying because microglia are the brain's immune defenses. What happens if your brain can no longer defend itself? Unfortunately or fortunately, we don't know yet. But let's not wait for that to happen before taking action. What to do? We need to limit as much as possible the global pollution and therefore the production of plastic. And to do that, you can simply stop buying them, starting with synthetic fiber clothing and packaging. Polyester, lyocell, polyamide, pinatex, acrylic, viscose, elastane, modal, polyurethane, cupro. Plastic bags, stretch food film, bottles, trays, cans, bubble wrap, freezer bags. Between them, synthetic clothing and plastic packaging account for more than 50% of plastics manufactured worldwide. If you can also manage to do without non-essential everyday items, you can do something about over 60% of the world's plastics. Dishes, kitchen accessories, straws, flowers, toys, balloons, sequins, garlands, buoys, furniture, grass, rugs, carpets and upholstery, sports bags. And I could go on. For clothes, packaging and all these objects, you can do without them or find less toxic alternatives. All you have to do is look around or ask in the shops. If you can't find an alternative for something, let me know in the comments and I'll try to help you. Above all, don't forget that plastics travel, so we need to make a global effort. Many NGOs are working on this. Don't hesitate to help them by volunteering, signing petitions, or making donations. And above all, spread the word. Because we're not ostriches, people need to know about these invisible dangers. Because once they know dangers, they'll never be the same again. They'll never be the same again. Never be the same again. Never be the same again.